So yes, I'm just finishing up and wrapping basically the all 2-day courses. So just talking a bit about innovation, and I suppose it's just like referring back to the first presentation that you've been through. It's actually just kind of looking back, but also looking forward really. And when I'm actually just kind of started in the industry, I actually just thought that the industry was quite backwards, really, in the way they were actually just kind of designing buildings, in what they were actually just doing. So it's quite interesting how actually just kind of with time, it just actually my view of the industry, of the construction industry has changed. And especially when you start a business, your perspective on things is completely different, which is quite interesting. So really what I would like to do, try that again. Yeah, yes. And yeah, so really what's happened is that as I was progressing through my career, I realized that each of the projects are different. We're very much in an industry where we actually just kind of respond to an architectural brief. Each of the sites are very different. We actually just have different ground conditions that we have to actually resolve. And we do have problems that we resolve. As you said, Sally, earlier, we're very good at resolving problems, and we do that for each of the sites. And it just means that each of the projects are very, very different. Each of the buildings that we're producing, just look around, everywhere, they are very different as well, really. So I do think that because of that, we actually are very innovative, naturally. I think that we're not necessarily very good at recognizing it. And I think that also what's happening is that we're very innovative, but we also actually just have very strong materials that we know how to use. We actually just kind of, one of the arguments that we could have is say, well, okay, we're actually just using materials that we know, steel, concrete, timber, but actually we're actually just using them now in very different ways, and we're just looking at different materials as well. I mean, biomimicry was something that we talk a lot about, and we are just kind of looking at how we can actually use those materials differently, or actually just create some new materials which are actually is coming from nature. We also, and I think that it goes back a little bit about the carbon emission discussion we had, is that we actually just kind of, so one thing that we've been looking at a lot is our sites are becoming much more difficult. You actually have made up grounds, and how do you actually design, on made up ground avoiding foundations, so ground bearing. So in this case, for example, so this is a cafe that we did in Bedminster, and in this case, we did a ground bearing slab, and it's actually just kind of on made up ground, which is 2 meters deep, instead of going traditional piling. And really, what we wanted to do is we wanted to, I mean, it was actually driven by necessity, because the client didn't have the money really ultimately to build this building with the piling foundations. And what we actually just kind of thought is that actually we can save a lot of carbon emissions if we were avoiding the piling really, and if we were a little bit more careful about how we design the building as well. So that's why we went into a timber frame structure, which is very light. So that was to us is quite critical. The other thing as well, so I talked about carbon emission and the use of timber, but it's also pushing that use, to a different space altogether. So we've been doing prefabricated timber structure for nearly 10 years now, since we started the business. And this is just like for a school that we did, very large spans, very, very big height as well, really. So really big timbers, in a school, with fire of 60 minutes, and, with quite a lot of technical issues that we had to resolve. So we can actually, this is where I find our role very exciting, is that actually we can actually just push those materials in very different ways. And then we also have to just think about thermal joints, air tightness, all those issues as well, which is not necessarily structural issues, but it will actually just kind of, because we've got to think about those, it will have a direct impact on the structure and how we design the structure. So another thing as well we've been using a lot is ICF, and again, in terms of air tightness, is really good. Is concrete, which is not brilliant, but what we actually has been doing is that we've been using it without any reinforcement at all, because we managed to prove that actually we didn't need to have reinforcement. So we actually just put reinforcement when we use it for retaining wall structure, for example, but not when you just have it for wall, which is kind of the standard practice. So that to us is quite interesting as well, really. And it's actually just kind of all the savings, as it was said before, just like will quickly add up to quite a lot. And it's actually just pushing a little bit beyond the standard, British standards really, and Euro strategies saying, well, okay, what about this really? And the other thing as well is offsite production. Obviously, it's been something which we've been talking about for quite some time, and it's been pushed quite a lot. And I think that one of the perception is that actually you do not have a bespoke design, but that's not true, because actually you can combine a bespoke. So here we had a retaining wall, which was a reinforced concrete external retaining wall. Nothing major about this really, but then on top of it, we actually just kind of put a prefab concrete house, which is a log house, and looking at it, you wouldn't know that it's actually just prefabricated really. So it's actually just kind of using materials, and products which are actually just prefabricated, and it's how you actually ensemble them that actually has become a little bit bespoke, and you can achieve some very high, very beautiful buildings in my view. So the other innovation that I can see is about the robots as well, really, and how that's going to change the way we actually design, but also is going to change the buildings. We actually is designing at the moment some mezzanine floors for robots, and basically they're only 2 meters high, because you don't need anybody to go underneath it, and nobody will go on top of it as well. So it's actually just kind of the form and the shape of the building and how they're going to just be is very different. It's going to change the way we actually work. It's going to change the way the materials are being transported as well, really, and ultimately how we're going to build, which is going to be quite interesting, I think. So there is a lot of innovation which is happening, that we actually have control of, which is actually just about the material, the techniques that we're using, the process, but there is also about the processes and the type of technologies we are doing. And that to me is also really interesting, and we are just experiencing all of those at the same time. And, we talked about remote working, and what I found really interesting with remote working is that actually we got closer to our client, because we were speaking to them on the phone maybe more, and because we had that time when we actually just met, and it was for a purpose. We were actually not actually just having a little catch up for coffee. When we met, it was actually because we had to talk about something, and we agreed that ahead of the time, which was really interesting. So that meant that that interaction was much more purposeful. The other thing as well is the way we actually do recruiting people. So we've been recruiting quite a lot, and I never really agree. There's two things that I never really liked within the industry. One is project reviews, which I think are quite cruel, basically, because we're just looking at what people have done wrong rather than looking at what people have done right. But that's our industry a little bit. And interviews, really, I never really understood this kind of interviews when you've got to actually kind of be faced with, a panel of judges, and they actually tell you how good or bad, you are. So we're doing things completely differently here. We actually have a free stage, which is quite a long process, I suppose. But we actually have an initial conversation on the phone, so we don't actually see them as such. And we are just going to have a discussions about their thoughts, what kind of work they like to do, what they want to do, where is their career, and so on. So we are just kind of really just looking at the person and to say, well, okay, how those ethos and values correspond to our ethos and values. And then we are just going to look at their technical abilities afterwards, really. So we have a second interview, and we usually do ask them to do a little technical task. And we actually dig out a project that we're currently working on, and we say, all right, what do you think about this project? What do you think are the biggest risks? How would you do things differently? You know, and having these technical discussions around the drawings, but on a project which is a real project rather than a project that we may never have. So to us, that's been really interesting, and the type of candidates that we had then were very different, and the people we were employing are very different. So if the people that we're employing are different, then that means that we have to change too. And when I mean we, I mean I need to change, because everything, all the changes that comes from the company start from the top. And that has been really interesting for me, because so it's really interesting how the processes and how we change our process meant that I had to change myself as well. And the kind of leader manager that was, you know, that I was going to say suffer, is very different than the type of manager and leaders that we have now. You know, we don't have people shouting down the phone now and having an argument about, you know, structural issues in the construction industry. You actually have to have discussion. You have to actually support people. And what we actually is and one thing that I'm trying to work on, and this is where I'm trying to improve on, is the ladder of leadership, where we actually is moving away from instructing people to do certain tasks, basically, and to actually say, well, okay, what do you see? What do you think we should do here? You know, what do you like to do, and what do you intend to do? And then for the engineers to then turn into a position where they went through this process, a proper, you know, review, you know, and then as time goes by, they actually turn around and say, well, actually, this is what I've seen. This is what I thought would be a good thing to do. So I just went ahead and did it. And unless you tell me, no, don't do this, I will carry on doing it, basically, which is a very different position. And I think that, you know, a lot of people talk about giving your workers or the employees ownership, but we don't necessarily know what that means. What I found with that ladder, you know, I'm an engineer ultimately, so a ladder is a system. So I love systems. I understand that, which is quite good. So yeah, so this is what I inspiring, and then so again, you know, what kind of leaders do you want to be? And I think that also the other thing is, so I'll touch very briefly about, you know, what goes well and keep doing that. I don't think that people actually just learn from their mistake as such. I think that what we actually have to do is to say, well, okay, what kind of thing do we have to put in the process, you know, in the process of us doing the design? What kind of information would have lead you to a different outcome, and fix that first? You know, people don't make mistakes. You know, naturally, they will want to make the right decision all the time. So it's actually just kind of thinking, well, okay, what is the information that led them to actually with insight? Insight is a wonderful thing. You know, what led them to actually make that, you know, that decision where it could have been better, really. And then actually just going to say, well, okay, is that a support that they need? Is it something that we need to change within the process and how we actually is working? Yeah, is it or actually looking at it, there was no other way we could do it. We actually sometimes, and it's a little bit what we actually do with engineers, within our design. So you have to actually just go through the process of design it, realize that it doesn't work as well as you were hoping, to then actually just modify it and change it. And it's part of the design, and it's part of what we do. That's part of the process, really. So we just have to accept that as well. And this is where project review comes in. Project review should actually just kind of be able to give the opportunity of people to say, well, okay, this doesn't quite work. What can we do here to just improve that situation? And so really, just like going back a little bit about innovations and we actually just kind of followed a lot of, especially in the last 2 years, we actually just kind of innovated quite a lot in terms of the process, the way we actually just interact with each other, in terms of the materials. So I'm just wondering, and I was actually just asking myself, where does innovation come from? Is it something that comes from necessity, or is that something that comes from curiosity? And really, the example that I was going to go back to is a little bit like the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, when actually, it was actually somebody who was curious about the RNA, who did some research on the RNA. Instead of just looking at the DNA. DNA is a sexy part of chromosome, and RNA, nobody was actually just looking at it that much. And it's really just like a name when COVID came in, and it's when we actually just kind of realized that RNA actually could be actually modified to actually help us fighting COVID and actually just create the vaccine. So this is really what I wanted to actually just finish with, is to actually say, well, actually my view is I think that innovation is born out of curiosity, really, and then its applications and where we actually supply it is sometimes pushed through necessity. So I would like to invite all of you engineers out there to be curious, to ask, why is the sky blue? And actually just keep asking questions and be open to those questions, because it will actually lead to changes within the design that you actually just carry out within the world that we are just living in. And it will help us to just become much more innovative. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ingrid. That was brilliant. Where to begin? Okay, so I was very fascinated in your innovation in the interview process. And can you explain to me a little bit more about how you go about assessing candidates' attitudes and aptitude? So digitally, remotely, or how do you do it?
So basically, the way we do it is that we have a set of questions that we actually ask everybody. So it starts with a conversation with Ollie, who is actually not, she's my office assistant. She's not technical as such, really. So she wouldn't be able to have technical questions or be able to engage into technical. I mean, she understands what we actually is doing, but it's actually, so then it's actually a lot more about, who the person is, really, and what they want to achieve, in their career, in their life, and about their efforts, which is really interesting. And it's all about, well, who are you? What kind of, we work flexible hours in the sense that basically everybody can tell, we've got a calendar and we actually say, well, okay, ideally the hours that we would like you to work is 9 to 5. The way where you want to actually be, whether you're in the office or at home, you actually just put it in your calendar. And if you need to change your times, you just put it in your calendar, basically. You don't even have to actually just kind of agree with us or anything like that.
Yeah.
And if we actually have people working part-time, and what we actually tend to do is we tend to say, well, okay, same thing, you've got a few days. I like it to be regular because it's a lot easier to manage when you've got a lot of people. But at the same time, if they need to change it, they just put it on the calendar and we speak to Ollie, and that's all they have to do, basically, is to say, hey, I need to take this afternoon off, I'll just put it in the calendar and then that's it. So when we actually start first, that initial conversations is about, okay, well, how do they want to work? Do they want to come to the office? How do they work in team? Do they actually need to have a catch up every 5 minutes with somebody, or do they they prefer to work remotely? What kind of projects they've been working on? So it just a little bit. It's just a general chat, really. And then we actually after that we actually say, well, okay, if that person potentially is aligning with us, then in that case, that's where we actually meet. So that meeting can be remotely, or it can be, in the office. And what we have done in the office, living in Bristol is, we've been very lucky in our way, in the sense that we very quickly, we've been working remotely, it's been a change which has happened very quickly, but we also had people coming back into the office, and we have, I could have had 10 people here, but we keep it to 3 or 4 at a time, basically, and then we actually is going to rotate, it's naturally ventilated and everything else. It's a very nice office. So that's what people like to have a bit of contact, really, as long as it's safe. So that's what we tend to do. And then but what's really interesting with the second interview is that because that's the time the thing is with verbal conversations and how people present themselves verbally, people talk about blind interviews, and ultimately this is what we do. We actually do a blind interview. But we went into doing it without realizing that this is what we were doing. It just because it worked better for us as a process, because I was tired of having meetings, interviews with people, and I realized that actually what they wanted to achieve in their career wasn't what I could provide them, here.
Yeah.
So we just had to find a way to actually just kind of stop wasting time, my time and their time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's so important to have a good interview process.
Yeah. So that has been so you can actually, it's quite interesting. So this is going back to the conversations we were having about innovation, is that yes, it is very innovative in a way, but at the same time it was actually just because what we were doing wasn't working for us, really. So we just
a necessity.
We've got a different way of doing it, and it seems, and because the process is a little bit longer, what's happening is that we do have people with whom it actually works extremely well, and we have some people who they just want to be employed, straight away, and we go, well, I'm sorry, but that's not, I was going to say we're a small business. We are employing 15 people at the moment, so we're not a small business anymore. But if you have somebody who actually just doesn't like coming to the office, it will have a big impact, on everybody else. So we just have to make sure that they're really happy with coming to RISE. And part of that process is you've got to be a little bit more patient, and that's also a test a little bit during the.
It is, isn't it? So one of the hot topics that has been going on for the last 2 days is professional indemnity insurance.
Yes, I've had your questions.
Hot topic. Do you think the risk adverseness of insurers at the moment is going to have a detrimental effect on innovation in structural engineering?
If I'm being bluntly, the thing is, we all lie to our PI insurers.
Yeah.
Can I say that? No, I shouldn't say that. Okay, forget that. But the thing is, ultimately, is that or probably, because I think that as engineers, okay, just let me rephrase this differently. What I tend to do with my PI insurance is that we tend to just kind of go like, okay, well, we've got a basement, for example, where they actually just we underpin an existing basement by nearly 2.5 meters. So and it was the whole house, which was like kind of quite a large underpin. And what we did then is just kind of go like, okay, well, actually, we actually didn't speak to the PI insurance until we actually knew that the project was going to go ahead. And we were like, kind of, okay, so we've got this project, until we actually kind of, when we were at pre-proposal stage and feasibility study, we were actually just kind of saying to our PI company, well, we might have a basement, but we don't know yet. So at the moment, we're not going to say that we're doing basement. And then when we actually just kind of did the basement, we were like, oh, by the way, we've got this project. Can you hand this onto our PI, please? And can we have a cover? Mm-hmm. So that's the one thing. But, and there are some things that I will not do, which is basically you talked about cladding, fire engineers and things like that. So those are the things that I just go like, no, this is not part of it's not what we can do for our client. We will actually just kind of direct them to the right profession. But we will ask a question, we will actually say to our client, have you thought about fireproofing? Have you thought about this and that? Really, because I think
I don't think that the hardening of the insurance market should really have a knock-on effect with innovation. I think the way that our design codes are written at the moment, they promote innovation. In fact, they make innovation more accessible than the codes used to do. You know, they allow us a bit more freedom in terms of first principles and actually using our engineering judgment and our engineering knowledge. And what we're seeing from PI insurers isn't are you innovating? It's those key things. It's to do with fire engineering. It's to do with basements, specific risks. We're not necessarily getting questions on, are your first principles of engineering lacking? You know, that they're not asking that. And as long as we're applying them appropriately, we're testing where we need to in terms of what we're applying. I don't see why this insurance market should be affecting us coming up with innovative solutions.
The problem that we have is, I think that where the insurance market is going, so I think that we are very innovative in the sense that we go beyond the British standards and the Eurocode, and it's actually kind of, and as you're just doing it, like for example, the cafe that I was showing with the ground bearing slab, on made of ground. Well, we did it again, on a bigger scale, on the worst conditions. The contractor didn't believe that we were doing it. And actually, when we went on site, he was doing some site investigations without telling us, further site investigation that we did without telling us, just double check that everything was okay. And we've proven that actually it was. But it just, and that was interesting to us. And I think that all of this are happening because you become confident, in the solution that you're actually providing. And then the calculations comes, and then you go like, okay, well, if we are just building a ground bearing slab on made of ground, what is it that we need to check? Where are the risks? And if we actually fail, so this is where our natural instincts go straight to that, is if anything goes wrong, what would it be? And then actually just try to mitigate those issues. What PI insurance do is something completely different. They look at that. So, for example, for rice, they look at us and they go like, okay, it's a 10-year-old business. I've been on my own for the first part of the first 5 years. So now I've got 15 people working for me. So I've grown my business really hard. High risk. I've got some big projects I've been actually just asking for. So similar to the fire engineer, we were doing 10 million, so we don't anymore. We actually just have a 5 million. And even with the 5 million PI cover, it's very difficult, and it's becoming more and more difficult to keep that level of cover. And when we actually just kind of engage with them, it's actually just kind of everything is seen as a risk really, and it's very difficult to actually just kind of judge what they see as a risk. And ultimately, I think that people have lost appetite. The industry, basically the PI industry, has lost appetite in small businesses, and we find it very difficult. And it's something that you have to actually allow for a large sum of your of your expenses, your business expenses, under PI, because it is an engineer. So this is a problem. That now they're so big that it becomes like an engineer salary.
Yeah.
It's mad. It's the wrong.
It's a bit of a challenge. It is. It definitely is, and it's definitely been a key topic for the last 2 days that have been coming out.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it is that you, as a business owner, you've got to be very careful about the clients that you're just working for and what you choose, because you do have some people out there who just are sadly taking the opportunities to just kind of put a claim against you, and you've got to just kind of, if you feel that there might be that going on, you need to walk away, and that's
Well, Ingrid, thank you very much for that talk. That was wonderful and lots to think about.